So today we're going to be taking a look at the alternative future of the world. Now, as promised, for 50,000 subscribers, I'm going to be doing two specials. This is the second half of the first one, and if you haven't seen the first special, which is What If Every Empire Went to War, I suggest you go watch it because it is a very good video. I've read through a lot of the comments on the video, and I'm glad to see that you guys are enjoying it because it took me a very long time to make. So seeing that everyone is enjoying it makes me happy. But of course, since 50,000 subscribers is such a large milestone, I'm doing two specials, and this special is kind of a drawn out special because this will be a series. So yeah, this will be episode 1 of the Alternative Future of the World series. I'm excited to get started here, and I'm really going to test out this series because I have a feeling that it won't do too well because series in the past on my channel haven't ever really done that well, but we'll see. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Help us get to 60k and then 100k because well, recently we've been doing really good on YouTube. We're already at 53,000 subscribers as of me recording this video, and we just hit 50k on the 13th, so that's a big jump. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the scenario. All right, so starting off, we are going to be starting with the war in Ukraine. Now, I know that I've covered this about 15 different times now, but we are starting in modern day, which means you have to start from where we are now, which is June 20th for me, June 22nd for you. And yeah, so this is approximately what it looks like in Ukraine, and we're going to be building off from here. Now, do keep in mind this will be an alternative future of the world, so certain events may not play out how they will in real life, but the first couple episodes here will be doing just that. It's going to be portraying future events or more probable events, such as, you know, Russia and Ukraine going to war, and probably Russia finishing off Ukraine, which could span off for a couple more months, but this is an alternative future, so we can basically do whatever we want. So yeah, let's go ahead and start off here, where we have Russia continuing to invade Ukraine. At this point in the war, Russia is gaining ground. You know, before they weren't doing too well, they got kicked out of northern Ukraine, but now they're sending a lot more military in, and their logistics are becoming better. The Russians managed to take complete control of the Donbass area, which makes a lot of Ukrainian troops lose morale. In addition to this, they restart their operations in the north, which they go slow at first, but eventually they start to pick up speed. At this point in the war, we have Western weapons flowing into Ukraine and in mass speeds. But what we do see is a new event, which is Russia starting to attack these convoys heading into Ukraine. Now, in real life, Russia has already stated that they would attack these, but they really haven't done so yet. And since these are NATO members sending their supplies in, it would be interesting to see if this would invoke Article 5, but I doubt it would because these are most likely Ukrainians coming to the border and getting the supplies. So yeah, lots of weapons going into Ukraine. We have long-range missiles and all that kind of stuff. So now Ukraine has a lot more weapon systems than they used to have. Ukraine shoots some missiles and some of them go into Russian territory, which angers Russian President Vladimir Putin, who decides to declare full-on war in Ukraine and starts to mobilize the entire Russian military. Now, seeing as this is no longer just an invasion, this is full-on war, we have NATO kind of getting ready for a possible incursion into their territory. Troops in Western Europe start to move over towards Eastern Europe and line the border of all the NATO countries. And we finally have Turkey allowing for Sweden and Finland to join NATO after a long round of discussions. So now we have all 32 member states in NATO ready for a possible invasion into NATO territory, and everyone is on standby. After being fully mobilized, Russians start to swarm into northern Ukraine and beat back the Ukrainian army. Down south, a naval landing is made in Odessa, which cuts off all of southern Ukraine, which ends up going over to Russia. And from here, the Russians swarm up from southern Ukraine. They push over across the other side of the Dnieper, which encircles a lot of Ukrainian troops in the south. Eventually, the Russians push out and completely encircle them, and they are forced to surrender or die. In addition to Russia invading Ukraine, we also have Belarus finally declaring war on Ukraine after it looks like the tides of war have finally changed. Belarusian troops now come from another angle and start to encircle northern Ukraine and push towards Kyiv, which lies right about there. Northern Ukraine falls over to Belarus and Russia, and Russian troops start to spearhead up north towards their northern incursion. Eventually, their spearhead is met up, and we have a large number of Ukrainian troops scattered in the middle of Ukraine. These troops decide to push up north in order to gain more ground around Kyiv, which goes successfully, and they almost manage to break out of the spearhead until eventually doing just that. With this, Ukrainian troops decide to focus up north in order to protect the Kyiv area, and are also told to defend the western half of the Dnieper River. So Ukrainian troops managed to push out the Belarusians and Russians out of the northern area, as well as a little bit in the south, but ultimately end up losing all of this area. So now Ukraine is in a bit of a stalemate situation. They're not necessarily losing, but they're definitely not winning. The river that I keep mentioning runs a course that looks something like this. I might not be completely accurate, but that's okay because you get the main idea. But Ukraine is, as of now, pushed up against that river in these areas, which is good because that means Russia can't cross it. And if Russia does try to cross it, they can use their missile defenses from the west in order to blow up any crossing vehicles. The only problem they have is down here in the south, where the Russians have already gotten past the river area and are in southern Ukraine. So while they managed to hold their ground in the north, we have the Russians storming up from the south. Now, the perspective on time in this situation is probably viewing really low. And don't get me wrong, this isn't taking place within days. This is taking place within months. And this is taking a lot of time for Russia to do, but they are managing to do it. However, we do have the Russians pushing up from the south and doing a similar movement as they did earlier. Russian and Belarusian troops managed to push down and cut off Ukraine once again. This time, Ukraine finds it hard to break out of the spearhead, and eventually Russian troops start to storm across from the north and the south. Kyiv is captured, and Zelensky is forced to flee over here to western Ukraine. And eventually, the troops in central Ukraine are all captured. From here, Belarusian troops and Russian troops cross over from Belarus's southern border and start to invade the remainder of Ukraine. The forces push down and continue to squish into Ukrainian territory until only one major city is left, which is Lviv. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's pronounced many different ways, and I don't really feel like getting made fun of for not pronouncing it right. So that city is all that remains, and eventually it is starting to get encircled. NATO troops and Russian troops are in a staring contest on the border of Poland, while down south, all of Ukraine starts to fall to Russia. After months of fighting, all of Ukraine's military is captured, but there is still a heavy amount of guerrilla warfare happening within the country. Zelensky manages to escape to neighboring Poland. So now that all of Ukraine is captured, Russia can make up a peace treaty for the country, and let's go ahead and take a look at that said peace treaty. Alright, looking at this peace treaty here, we have Belarus gaining a little bit of northern Ukraine, but we have the eastern half of Ukraine, which is east of the Dnieper River, going over to Russia. As for the rest of Ukraine, we have a new government being set up that is extremely pro-Russian. So now we have a larger buffer zone between NATO and Russia, except for the fact that this buffer zone is controlled by Russia, and they're starting to move military assets into this area. NATO doesn't like this and is to start to supply Eastern Europe even heavier. Eventually, after all these forces are moved in, it comes clear with what Russia's next plan is, and that is to invade Moldova. Romania, who is very close with Moldova, is not happy about this. But they don't do anything because if they were to attack Russia, they really wouldn't get NATO support with them. And overall, Romania wouldn't have a chance of winning that war. So what they do is they just send volunteers into Moldova, and they also start to heavily supply the country. Which really doesn't matter though, because Russian troops are now swarming into the country, which very swiftly falls over to Russian forces. And we once again see another peace treaty erupt. Looking at this peace treaty, Moldova is forced to be annexed by Ukraine, which is really interesting because Russia invaded Ukraine to free the Russians that were there. So it's kind of weird that they're mixing Ukrainians and Moldovans together. But hey, that's just a Russian thing. So now these borders are very, very tense. And it once again looks like another Iron Curtain has set across Europe, except this time it's a little bit further back. So now Russia has one more country in which it has a plan for special operations, and that is Georgia. Now Russia already has a little bit of land in Georgia, similar to how they already had control of Crimea in real life, and they use this to their advantage and start to push into northern Georgia. The only problem with this country is that it's literally a mountain, so this is a very slow invasion. They managed to use their navy and take control of the Georgian coast along the Black Sea, but ultimately that doesn't really get them that far. It's also at this point that NATO starts to realize that their policy with Russia and NATO itself may be a little bit outdated, and they might have to start updating their policies in order to kind of contain Russia. And by that, NATO states that it will now interfere with any war in which Russia gets involved with. Now the only term with that is that the country must be a NATO partner or work closely with NATO. So technically Georgia would apply for that because they are a NATO partner, although this policy was invoked after they started to invade Georgia, therefore it doesn't count for them. But we have countries such as Azerbaijan qualifying as a new NATO partner. We also have Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was already a NATO partner, Austria, and Ireland. We also have Kosovo applying for NATO partnership, but it's kind of on the line thing because Greece doesn't recognize them, as well as Spain and I think Romania. So yeah, it's a little bit iffy on that one. But back over in Georgia, the Russian army has a lot of success in northwestern Georgia. And from here, they push down to capture all of eastern Georgia. And eventually, the country capitulates to Russia, but once again, we have a lot of guerrilla warfare. In the peace treaty, Georgia gets completely annexed by Russia. So now looking at how Eastern Europe has changed in, I guess, a 5 to 10 year span, we have a lot of changes. Russia invaded the eastern half of Ukraine and annexed all of it. We have a new government in Ukraine which is very pro-Russian. Moldova was annexed by Ukraine, and now we have Georgia being annexed by Russia. But now we're met with a roadblock as Russia has nowhere else to really expand. All of the rest of Europe is NATO aligned. Of course, Turkey is as well. Armenia is their ally, and Azerbaijan is a NATO partner. So they could invade Central Asia, but they already have fair relations with these countries, so there really wouldn't be a point in doing so. And yeah, for now, Russia's expansionism is stopped. Elsewhere in the world, though, we do have some interesting scenarios playing out, such as Bougainville finally getting independence from Papua New Guinea, and this is a real life thing, so this island does want their independence from Papua New Guinea, and it is said that they will get independence by 2027, in which that year has already passed in this scenario, so they are now independent. Also, this might be the Solomon Islands. I'm pretty sure this is it though, so I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong though. All right, so we have one more country in the world, but also two less. We have another major event happening, and this time it's in the Pacific Ocean. So in this scenario, China has not yet invaded Taiwan, although in real life this will probably take place before 2027, but they don't do that just yet. You see, in real life, China has been having some incursions into the Taiwanese airspace, but in this scenario, they're doing it almost daily. We've also been seeing Chinese warships in the Strait of Taiwan, and this is very alarming for the country, and an invasion seems pretty much imminent. So taking a quick look at the military alliances of the world. Now, I know this isn't probably everything. There's things like the Rio Pact, and there's also things like CSTO. I know those exist, but due to the countries within those pacts having some issues with each other, we're going to assume that they aren't really military pacts. There's also the Arab League, which also probably really wouldn't function as a defensive military alliance, but here we have outlined every real defensive military alliance. Now, countries also have individual alliances, such as the US having a defensive pact with Israel, South Korea, Japan. All those countries have defensive pacts with the United States, but they aren't outlined here because that would just be too much. And then I'd have to do that with every single country. So yeah, we're just gonna be sticking to this, which is just NATO and then AUKUS, except I've done something interesting with that alliance. So we all know how there's the American, United Kingdom, Australian alliance. There's also the UK, Australia, New Zealand. They're all connected in one way or another, and also Canada's in there with Kanzuk. So what if we just merge them all into one alliance? And that's what I have outlined here. So the pink, that would be the new alliance, and then the purple would be the new alliance plus NATO. So if it's purple, it's in NATO as well as in the new alliance with Oceania. So yeah, that's just a quick look at alliances. Let's go ahead and jump right back into the alternative future. Just kidding, because we have a new alliance forming up, and that is the alliance between the United States, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. These are the founding members of the Pacific Defense Organization, or the PDO. Now, of course, the United States is already in an alliance with two other groups of countries, so they're going to be getting their own color now, which is most likely this orangey color. And now we have this alliance established. Now we actually have some other countries also opting to join the PDO, which is Australia, who gets this beigey color. And yeah, you're really going to want to watch this first video to understand like what is happening with all these alliances here, because I have a feeling that I'm probably going to be getting a lot of other countries to join, and eventually I'll probably just merge it all into one big alliance. But for now, this is what we have on the alliance map. And yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at one last war in this video, and that would be the US starting a special operations mission in Cuba. Now, the world probably would not be in favor of this, most likely, because, you know, America doing what Russia did in Ukraine, that's not okay. But they have an actual reason this time, and that is that they somehow got a hold of plans for Russia to put missiles in Cuba, similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Except this time the missiles aren't there yet, but they do have some spies in Cuba, and it is confirmed that Russia did plan to put some weapons in Cuba aimed towards the United States. So with this, the US finds justification to declare war on Cuba, and the United States Navy swiftly occupies the waters around Cuba. From here, American troops land on the northern part of the island, just 90 miles south of the Florida Keys. And with this landing, they push over and manage to capture Havana within the first week of landing. From here, Cuba is effectively cut in half. American troops push into and capture all of western Cuba, as well as their island down here. And now the United States starts a campaign to invade the rest of Cuba, which goes pretty successfully. The Cuban military has a very low morale, and the Cuban citizens are in favor of the American invasion, which essentially just leads to the capitulation of the island country. Taking a look at a peace treaty, Cuba becomes a part of the United States and is integrated as a territory. So they now get an orange color, and the US now has a lot more influence and control over the Caribbean Sea. And yeah, that's going to do it for this first episode, so let's go ahead and take a look at a quick recap of what happened. Russia finished its invasion of Ukraine and effectively puppeted the rest while annexing the east. Moldova was annexed by Ukraine. Georgia was also annexed into Russia. NATO was enlarged to Ireland, Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, a little bit of Kosovo, and Azerbaijan. We have all the oceanic alliances being merged into one large one, including the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. After that, we had the formation of a new Pacific Defense Organization, which includes South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and the United States. And finally, we had the US invasion of Cuba for missiles. And yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. So if you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. This will be the same map we use for every single video, and we're going to add on to it as we go. So if you want to see the continuation of this series, I will definitely keep doing it as long as you guys are enjoying it. So yeah, like I said, let me know in the comments. This has been part 2 of the 50,000 subscriber special, and I guess this is episode 1 of part 2. And yeah, as of now, we're growing really rapidly. We're hitting some records, and that's amazing. So yeah, 100K is in sights, and we can probably get there by the end of the year if we really, really try to get there. Personally, I think we'll probably hit it around February, March, April, that area of next year. But I want you guys to prove me wrong. So once again, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.